All right. Let's get back into your questions here. Cheryl B129229 says, also, have you seen... Oh, you know what? Let me start with your... You've got two of them here. Let me start with the first one. Hey, I may have missed this, but if you haven't covered it yet, can you talk about Daryl holding the guitar at the opening of the Daryl Dixon Season 2 trailer? That feels so Beth coded to me. Like, the very last scene we ever saw her in was when Tyrese was dying and she was singing Struggling Man while playing the guitar. Probably unrelated, but I also think it's kind of interesting how Beth has always been the musician on the show who sings in a crowd, like everything's a big game. Yes, I'm going to address this. Or whatever, but when Glenn asked the group in Season 2 if anyone could play the guitar, they said Otis was the one who could play. Now, maybe that's just a plot hole because they didn't originally plan for Beth to be playing the guitar in the afterlife or whatever. But I always thought that was interesting. I mean, come on, Glenn, you didn't know that Beth was going to play the guitar in the afterlife. Why don't you know these things? And speaking of music, have you ever heard of the writers ever... Have any of the writers ever owned up to why 508 was called Coda? That's a musical term, and that usually means the end of something. Do you think it was the meaning the end of their time in Georgia, or do you think it being a musical term was trying to tie it to Beth somehow? Also, just two questions for my own amusement. A, do you know if there's any evidence he still has her knife, or was that maybe taken by the Saviors? And B, is there a compiled list somewhere of all the times post-Coda where on screen it looked like he had to have been thinking about Beth? Okay, lots to cover here. Yeah, let me talk about the guitar. I have not talked in great detail about the trailer yet, but yeah, I think the guitar is a huge deal. Couple of reasons. Like you said, well, first of all, it's musical, and anything musical we always tie to Beth because, yes, like you said, she was the musical character. Number two, the last time we saw her, she was holding a guitar, if we don't count Rick's hallucination, but I'm pretty sure that in Rick's hallucination, I don't think that was actually Emily that did that because they didn't show her face. It could have been an extra that they dressed up to look like her. So last time we for sure saw Emily's face, and she was for sure, filming there and in the show was 509, and yeah, she was playing a guitar. So I'm with you. The other thing that I immediately thought of that you kind of mentioned in passing here is the line from Still. So during the I Nevers, they do all of their I Nevers, things that they've never done, and then all of them end up coming to pass in some way or another. So he said he'd never left Georgia, and then, a few episodes later, they leave Georgia. People talked about how Buttons qualified as the never having a pet pony. All these different things. And as far as I know, the only one that we haven't seen come to pass is the one where he said he's never sung out in public before. So I've been waiting for that to be fulfilled. Like, I'm very, very curious how they're going to end up fulfilling that. The obvious thing would be to hear Daryl sing. And I honestly don't know if they're going to do that. I mean, it doesn't have to be, because the way that they're fulfilled isn't usually literal. Like, Buttons wasn't his pet pony in the sense that someone was like, here you go, Daryl, here's a pony, happy birthday, and it has a bow on it. No, it wasn't that. It was him interacting with this horse and basically trying to be responsible for it, trying to save it, him and Aaron, and that didn't work, which is why it was sort of a stand-in for Beth, because the horse died, unfortunately. And then there were those lines Daryl spoke about, you used to be someone's, now you're just yours, which was clearly him talking about himself. Anyway, so my point is, I don't know that the whole singing out in public will be literal. And I don't know, I hate to speculate, but I mean, he's carrying this guitar, which I doubt is for himself, since Daryl doesn't play the guitar. So maybe he runs into somebody who is musical and he helps them with their show in some way. And it doesn't have to be him singing and dancing in public. Daryl probably wouldn't do that, but just helping in some way, you know what I mean? And so that he was kind of part of whatever their act is, and then that would qualify as him singing out in public or in the I Never, right? Anyway, but my point is, I've been waiting because we haven't seen anything that would even remotely qualify to be the fulfillment of that. And I feel like every single one of those I Nevers kind of has to be fulfilled before she returns. So to me, it's a big deal that he has the guitar. I think it will be the fulfillment of what was said in Still. And so that made me really, really excited to see that. And like you say, it's also just... it's a big deal because we saw Beth playing the guitar, and it's musical, and all the things. I know the thing about season 2 has been discussed before. As you say, it probably was a lack of planning at the time. They just didn't think about it very much, and they were trying to make a point about Otis being gone because at that time the audience knew that Shane had killed him, but nobody else did. So it was just, kind of the way that they were engineering the show at the time. But, people have always also discussed that we don't actually know that Beth does play the guitar or did play the guitar in real life. She might have. And when I say in real life, I don't mean Emily. Obviously, Emily plays the guitar. But we never saw Beth in the show playing the guitar, and when we did see it, it was Tyrese's hallucination, and Tyrese knew she was musical, so that could have also been him conjuring up an instrument that she would play, and then, of course, logistically, it was easier than having her sit down at a piano in that scene, or, I don't know, play a flute or something like that. I mean, it was an instrument that Emily actually does play, and it just worked for what they were trying to do. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to talk about, and at the end of the day, it really might have just been a plot hole from season 2, like you said. But yeah, it's definitely kind of interesting to speculate about that. I don't think that I've ever heard any of the writers talk about why it's called Coda, as in, this is what we were thinking when we chose this title. No, they're actually being very tight-lipped about that, and that's actually interesting because it's not like anyone ever did a deep dive into every single title of every single episode. They didn't, but every once in a while, when we had an interesting title that maybe wasn't terribly apparent, the reason for choosing it, then on Talking Dead, I remember hearing Chris sometimes ask about, okay, well, what does the title mean? And again, it's not like they did that for every single title all the time. They didn't, but they never did that about Coda, and I think there's reason for that. I think they don't want to reveal their thoughts on why they picked that. Now, a coda can be the ending, concluding part of a musical piece, but it means a lot of things. I mean, it can be the end, and there have been plenty of arguments made about how maybe that was exactly what they were going for, but it still doesn't mean that Beth isn't returning. It was the end of that particular arc for her. It was the end of, they did a lot of symbolizing with carrots and like the Carrot King song that they were supposed to play in Still, and then they weren't able to get the copyright for it. Carrots have 2 seasons. They have like their baby carrot season and then their more mature season. So that could have been the end of Beth's, first arc. And then when we see her again, she'll be in the second part of her arc. She'll have matured a lot as a character. But as you said too, it might have been more like the coda for the entire group's arc, their time in Georgia and, living where they kind of all first came together. I mean, once they leave and get to Alexandria, they don't even stay in Alexandria as a particular place very long. I mean, they very quickly start moving out to other places like Hilltop and the Kingdom, and it just expands very quickly. Whereas in season 1 was very migratory, but in season 2 and 3, even though they were different places, one was Herschel's farm and one was the prison, we didn't see them expanding out very much to other people or other settlements. So yeah, it was like the structure was going to change a lot of the story. And so it could have been any of those things, but coda in music can also, it also means skipping over a piece of music. So you tend to play through, go back to the beginning, skip to the coda and play it, and then you can actually repeat the whole thing just depending on how the music is written. So it also might have been a clue that, I mean, coda, you have to understand this too, there is, in musical notation, if they want you to skip over something and go to the coda, there is a sign that is also called a coda sign, all right? So I'm going to try to explain this in a way that isn't confusing. The title of coda might not have been referring to the end piece of music called coda. It might have almost been saying, okay, coda, like indicating the coda sign, which just means we're going to skip to another passage. And that would apply specifically to Beth. We're going to skip over her part for a while and do something else. Or let me try that again. Like her storyline, her character, in order to get back to her storyline, we have to skip. So we're not going to see her for a while. We're going to have to skip to her storyline, which is far down the line. You see what I mean? So I don't know if I'm explaining that well. You have to kind of understand musical notation, but it could have been a lot of things. And there's literally like 56 different reasons that they might have chosen that title, and we have no idea which one it is. And chances are it plays into a bunch of them, and they're not going to tell us, because that would be giving far too much information that they don't want to give, because they want her return to be a surprise. So again, I don't think I've ever heard any of them actually talk about the reasons for Coda, but we can speculate, and all of them are super interesting. All right, so then, do you know if there's any evidence he still has her knife, or was it taken by the Saviors? As far as we know, he does. In fact, a good friend of mine was able to ask Norman this question when they were doing a Q&A on the cruise. She asked if Daryl still has Beth's knife, and he said yes, that he still has it somewhere. And he wasn't like wishy-washy or, oh yeah, I don't know. He's like, yeah, he does. So as far as we know, it's still around somewhere, but we definitely haven't seen it in the show. And of course, you could argue that a lot has happened. I mean, that was several years ago. And so maybe the answer would have changed if we asked them again. But I don't know. The fact that he said that and that he was so solid on it, I think that knife is going to come back into play. I think the writers are planning on it coming back into play. And just like Beth, we're not seeing it on screen for a while, but it'll show up at some point, in my opinion. So that's about the only evidence we have that he still has her knife, but it's pretty dang strong evidence. All right, and then is there a compiled list somewhere of all the times post-Coda where on screen it looked like he had to have been thinking about Beth? Not that I know of. That would be fun to create a list, but at this point you would almost have to go back and rewatch everything. I don't know. It just feels like any time that there is a reference to her or to something that relates to her, that's when we kind of think that he might be. A big one that comes to mind for me, and this was like a very minor moment in the show, so especially for TDers, a lot of people don't think about it, and it kind of was there and gone. But the stuff that had to do with, what season was it? I guess it was season 9, so it was right about the time Rick disappeared, and I think it was the episode right after, within a few episodes of when Rick disappeared. I mean, Daryl came back, and anyway, there was all this stuff with Cindy. No, that would have been right before Rick disappeared. I'm sorry, Rick was still there, I think. Anyway, I'm even getting confused about where in the timeline it is. Anyway, several of the Saviors were disappearing and getting killed, and it was because Cindy and some of the Oceansiders were killing them because, like, for revenge for things that the Saviors did before Rick made peace with everybody. And there's a part where Cindy talks about her brother and how he was killed by Arat, who was Negan's right-hand gal, who also killed Olivia. And she kind of just goes on this rant and starts screaming. And it's very emotional. It's a very, very sad scene. And she says, my brother, I loved him, I needed him. And at that part, I mean, Daryl's eyes just kind of slide to the side like he's thinking about something. And I was like, oh, he's thinking about Beth. And I actually made an edit to that idea, and I remember actually getting some hate on it from some carolers. So yeah, I think there are particular times that a lot of us have homed in on it and said we think that he's thinking about her here, but it's always hard to tell because they don't tell us that. We don't get inside Daryl's head. We don't get his thoughts. Anyway, so as far as I know, there's not a compiled list. If anyone knows of one, then let us know. And if anyone wants to create one, I'm sure we would all love that and would love to add to it. We could come up with a pretty good compendium, I think. All right, so I hope that answered all your questions. Let me get to the last one here. Also, have you seen Emily's TikTok where she said she was working on something secret for TWD fans? Yeah, this was a while ago. I did see that. I don't know. I'm not entirely remembering now if that was the thing where she re-recorded the song. I'm not sure that was the same thing, but yeah, I remember that being super suspicious, and I think it was. She ended up re-recording Parting Glass, and not only was that like a huge Beth hint, we thought it's another way that Emily's being suspicious, but it's like, why is she re-recording this song? We haven't really, she showed us that she was re-recording it, but why? I mean, she already recorded it back in season 3 for the show. Why would she need to re-record it? And if it's for something unrelated or just something fun she's doing, okay, but why doesn't she tell us that? Why doesn't she tell us what it's for? Usually she'll say that. She'll say, oh, this is a new song I wrote for my upcoming album that's coming out or something, And in this case, she just said, oh, I'm re-recording this, and it's a fun thing for Walking Dead fans. But why are you recording it? Like, what is it for? And I think what everybody's head went to is she recording this for season 2 of Daryl Dixon? Are we going to hear her singing this at some point, even if it's just as a voiceover? Maybe. I hope so. That would be fantastic. But we don't know. And so the fact that she showed us that, but was also a little bit mysterious about it, is what's really suspicious. So, yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on it. And beyond that, we'll just have to wait and see what season 2 brings us. But it's coming up soon. We're getting there. We're getting there. Just about another month now. I'm so excited. All right, so I'm going to call it there for today, and I will be back soon. Bye, guys.